People who quit their jobs without notice. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? Story 1. I was a shift lead in a kitchen where none of the management knew anything about BO. I ran grill, sauté, expo, and ovens solo during every peak shift. I ordered trucks, prepped all week for weekend brunch, wrote kitchen schedules, coordinated kitchen cleaning projects, contacted vendors for repairs, and generally ran the kitchens day to day. I was given the keys and started opening 6 days a week. I was working 55+ hours and loving it. I expanded our brunch service to Fridays as well as Saturday/Sunday, and I come up with an early week menu to use up leftover brunch items and minimize waste. I helped grow weekly sales from 40-45K to 75-80K in 3 years. I started having issues with closing management on shifts where I wasn't there. I'd get in at 6 a.m. to open and the restaurant was left a mess and prep/stocking wasn't completed. I talked to the staff and tried to get them to help out, but I had no support and follow-through from the actual managers. This went on for weeks. Then one week I was in at 5 for Friday brunch prep. I was prepping sheets of bacon and went to the back to pull the biscuits I had prepped the day before. I had left them on a speed rack. I found them on a shelf stacked on top of each other. The weight of the trays had smashed every biscuit into single sheets of dough on the lower trays. The speed rack had the dressings and cold items from the line closed the night before. I did about 90% of the brunch prep by the time the opening manager showed up at 8:30. We opened at 9. I told her what was left to set up the line. She asked why I was telling her. I laid the sheets of dough in front of her, dropped my keys on top, and walked out. I got nearly 50 calls from them that day and dozens of texts. I didn't respond to a single one. A few days later, the owner of the store called me and asked who he needed to fire to bring me back. I told him I'd pass and ended up finding another job in a day. A little over a year later, this restaurant shut down and was demolished to turn the space into a parking garage. Story 2. Over a decade ago, worked at Tim Hortons. Had been there 6 years on overnight shift. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. we were always understaffed. Usually just 2 people, one in the back, one at front of house. Of course it is slower than during the day, that goes without saying, but there are a few rushes when certain places close. Anyways, they hire back a guy who had previously been fired like 4 times for just not showing up. He was on the schedule on a Sunday morning with me. There was a 20 dozen donut order and that was the day the freezer truck arrived and I put that away. I remember saying if he doesn't show up, I'm probably just going home. Needless to say, he doesn't show up. Managers aren't picking up either. I think I stayed for a few hours futilely trying to get everything done. I closed down the front and the drive/through for what I intended to be a few hours to try to at least have the order ready for 6 a.m. but then a switch kind of flipped. I realized I wasn't going to be able to take any break the entire time. Somehow I'd have to figure out how to put away a freezer delivery, which arrives literally at 5 a.m. which is busy as hell, and I'd be doing that as well. The people that showed up in the morning would just do their usual bitching about stuff I wasn't able to do. I'd probably get written up again for some stupid reason or because I didn't do X or Y or whatever, and all this for like $10.50 per hour. I paused and asked myself, how long do I want to work here? And right then a bunch of drunk kids were knocking on the door, apparently confused why the lights were off and the door was locked, because that's an enigma. I decided 6 years is enough and went home. Story 3. I've only quit one job ever, in high school when I worked at a grocery store. But I quit after I somehow was the only person scheduled to work on a Saturday night. Like, literally the only person. I was 16 or 17? Granted I lived in a small town, but being the only person working in a whole-ass grocery store, to emphasize, only person. Not a single other person was working. Not a janitor, not a manager, not a bag boy, no one else, was just absurd. Never went back. How do you manage to only schedule one person on a weekend? I can't imagine being 16 and expected to run a grocery store by myself. I would have quit too if I were in OP's position. Story 4. Heard my boss talking about my mom, who did not work for the company, on the phone to HR, while at work. She said my mom was a nut job and went on to lie about how she had plans to replace me for the last few weeks. She was deeply paranoid and earlier that week she'd gotten wind that I was looking for a second job closer to home, which caused us to have a long talk where I kept having to reassure her I had no plans to quit, but just her assuming I would quit had made her turn on me like that after 6 years of working together, including multiple major work events, like COVID. So somehow she went from begging me not to leave, to the next day telling HR she had plans to fire me for weeks, but it was what she said about my mom during that same call that broke the camel's back. My mom was in deep grieving at the time, having found her boyfriend dead on the floor on her birthday, and I had confided in my boss that I was spending a lot of energy trying to help my mom and that it was causing me stress. As soon as I heard her say that, I packed up my desk, walked over to HR and told them everything I'd heard, and quit when they said they didn't have any other positions open elsewhere in the company and said they wouldn't take action against my boss. Story 5. VP of the company took me aside and showed me how my skills in maintenance had saved the company about $15,000 in my first year there. Along with that, I volunteered for our department's safety officer as soon as I got there, and was always taking the shit jobs nobody wanted. I asked for a raise and got the runaround and told I wasn't worth it. I put in a week's notice and moved. Now I'm making over 2x as much and way happier and appreciated for my work with less hours. I wish daily that place goes bankrupt. A blind kid could manage coloring a photorealistic painting with his big toe before that place had proper management. Story 6. The manager was always kinda mean. Threw pots and pans. Threw finished orders that he didn't deem worthy of the customer. Dragged a customer out of the restaurant while she was having a panic attack because he had her well into her meal after she was already in for her first drink. I worked there for 2 years. I was 22, a lot of the people I worked with in the afternoons were still in high school. I was on the grill when he started screaming at this 16-year-old girl who he told to man the fryers. She had no prior experience, it was a Saturday night. He started screaming at her because she was slightly backed up, but doing extremely well for it being her first time. She had tears in her eyes before he shoved her to the side and took over himself. The kitchen went silent. Felt like time stopped. We all walked out together. Nobody really said anything. She left first, then the dishwasher, then me and 2 other guys. The manager was cursing and customers were watching us all leave. The servers were stressed but understood. It felt like sweet relief. Story 7. I was a shift supervisor at Wendy's. One night, a customer ordered an apple pecan salad after we had sold our last pre-made one. I asked an employee to gather ingredients from the walk-in fridge, specifically, a bag of pre-chopped apples. He brought me 2 bags. One contained a browned apple and had an expired expiration date label. The other looked fresh and wasn't expired. I thanked him, took the fresh one, and instructed him to dispose of the expired one. He refused because he was afraid my boss would find out it was him and fire him. I said, "She can't fire you for doing what I told you to do, especially if it's the right thing to do." The next day, I get a call from an underage employee asking for a ride to work. When I picked him up, I suddenly remembered that he wasn't on the schedule and asked him why he was going on. He explained that the boss had asked him to sub for someone she fired. We arrive at work, and I walk straight back to the office to check the schedule and see that she's crossed out the employee name who threw out the apples. I asked my boss why his name was crossed off the schedule, and she said he was wasting perfectly good food. I told her that I told him to throw it away because it was brown and the stamped date was expired. She yelled back that it was only a few days past expiration, and it was still fine. I explained that it is illegal to sell food beyond its expiration date, but if she wanted to eat it herself, she was welcome to get it out of the dumpster. She said she did get it out of the dumpster and made salads with it. Then she yelled, "You don't throw away milk just because the expiration date has passed without sniffing it first." I yelled back, "First of all, the apples were fucking brown, and second of all, I absolutely will throw out expired milk without sniffing it because spoiled milk smells awful and I don't want to ruin my appetite while I'm serving myself a meal." Then she threatened to fire me, and I yelled that she should because I was the one who instructed the employee to dispose of expired food, and I'll do it again. She admitted it was an empty promise because she couldn't afford to fire me, so I told her I was quitting. She asked, "Right now?" I said, "No, I'm giving my 2-week notice, but I start my 2-week vacation tomorrow, so tonight is my last shift." Later that night, I called the fired employee and apologized for getting him fired and bragged about how I quit in solidarity. When my 2 weeks vacation was up, I actually did have to work 1 more week in order to get paid for my 2-week vacation, because I needed 1 more week to qualify working a full year. During that final week, I had an exit interview with the district manager. I explained why I quit and spoiled the beans on a bunch of other shit the boss did wrong, and also suggested she get the security camera system fixed without the manager knowing because the manager's shift is constantly putting money in the register and handing food out of the window without ringing it up in the system. Then the manager counts out the drawers, which is against policy, and pockets the excess cash. During my next shift, a couple of tech guys from corporate showed up to fix the security camera DVR, but left the second they opened the closet and saw we had a VHS system. They couldn't just fix it. They needed to replace it. Also, They were very confused as to why we had a VHS system considering how new our store was. I told them the rumor was that the manager swapped it with a system from her house so she could get away with it. Anyways, the district manager asked me to work at a store that was closer to my house for 1 month, because all of the managers at the other store were overdue for vacations but they didn't have enough managers to take vacations. When I started working at the other Wendy's, I explained to the general manager why I quit and got transferred, and that I'd quit with no notice if he overruled my decisions on food safety. He agreed. I worked there for almost a month and never had a single shift where I was the only manager on duty, which either meant that they did have enough managers to take vacations, or they weren't taking any vacations anyway. Then, one day, an employee grabbed a bag of frozen chicken out of a freezer, unaware that it was already open, and dumped the whole bag of frozen chicken on the floor right in front of the general manager and I. The employee looked at us both, shrugged, and asked, 5-second rule? I replied, no. The 5-second rule works if your only concern is vilification contamination, which can be cooked off, but we clean the floors with toxic chemicals that cannot be cooked off. If you serve that chicken to customers, you will poison them. The employee looked at the general manager for confirmation, but the general manager said, he's right, but that's a whole lot of money. Pick it up and serve it. I walked out while saying, good luck with the food poisoning lawsuits. Loud enough for customers to hear. Stories like this one make me not want to eat out anymore. I can't believe how common these stories are. Massive props to OP for speaking out about that stuff. The world needs more people like them. Story 8. I was promoted from backroom to entertainment specialist at Target. It came with a raise to $10.25 per hour. It was great. Then the electronics specialist quit, and I took over his duties, as well as my own. Okay, that's cool. Then we were short-handed on floor staff, so I also had toys, sporting goods, auto, travel, HEPA, and baby hardlines. Setting end caps, doing price changes, clearance, pulling and stocking. On top of my actual job, which on Tuesdays, street date, was super fun moving every movie/CD/book one spot towards the back. Then came the Xbox 360 PS3/Wii launches. And digital TV. After a couple years of working 60 hours a week, I thought I should apply for an open team lead position. Surely I had proven my work ethic was second to none, I had more red cards than anyone else in the district, I had been recognized as a top seller of electronics in our region. I was told I wasn't qualified because I didn't have a degree. I said fuck it and walked. Left them with no one to cover the back half of the store. I heard it was a shit show for a while after. Problem was, that was mid-2008. I wasn't big on the news at the time, and didn't realize we were in the midst of the Great Recession. I assumed I'd walk out and just find another job paying more. That was a rough wake-up call. Making rent the next few months was tough. I picked up random jobs, and scoured CL listings all night. People always asked why I stayed at my last job for 14 years, I think it was the PTSD of my last career change keeping me in a stable position. Story 9. Fast food as a teen. Worked the manager's spot on weekends overnight. Made just over minimum wage. The manager who would relieve me on Saturday and Sunday mornings was often late. Called in because my car wouldn't start and I needed a friend to drop me off, so wanted to warn them I might be a few minutes late for the first time ever. It was her and she started yelling at me over the phone. I scrambled and made it in 5 minutes late. If she had just made a snide remark or let it go we probably would have been fine, but she wanted to yell and scream and berate me and I just snapped. Yelled back that I was basically overworked and underappreciated being a manager without the title/pay and brought up her being late, hours sometimes, to relieve me basically every weekend. And I couldn't leave because I was the manager just like she couldn't till I showed up. And told her I quit. I was already thinking about it. I basically worked to have my car and my car was struggling and school was starting to suffer. The other guy who was supposed to be on nights with me saw it and quit in the spot with me. Story 10. Requested and was approved for PTO so that I could get dental surgery. The morning of surgery, get a message from my boss that I had to go to work ASAP. Explained that surgery was in 30 minutes, he told me that I had to be there that afternoon. Came in after surgery. Couldn't speak, was in a world of pain. The reason? His boss was present and she asked if I was around. When she saw me in my condition, she apologized and had a very loud conversation with him. She had been one of my regulars in my previous company, yay, food service. A few days later he laid into me about my lack of professionalism and other topics about general management. I ended the call, put my keys in the safe, emailed his boss, and left. He was fired about a week later, but it wasn't enough to get me to return. Story 11. I worked at a pharmacy. Quit 2 days in. Day 1 was red flag anyway, as every single person who came in with a controlled substance was talked about when they left like they were all drug addict junkies and not people who might actually need that medicine. Day 2 they sent me alone, I'm a female BTW, to deliver meds to random people. I'm in a very sketchy part of town, knock on a door and announce who I am and why I'm here. They yell it's open and I open the door. Then they yelled for me to shut the door because I was letting the cool air out. So I quickly do so and I realize I'm in a stranger's house with the door shut delivering drugs for a company that made it policy that I couldn't have my weapon with me during work. I could be doing this illegally tax-free working for myself and be safer Lamau. I went back to the pharmacy, handed them the keys to the delivery car, and left. Story 12. In college, I worked for a landscaper, mostly just mowing. It was a one-man operation, but it was flexible. We were driving around in a 60s 2.5-ton GM truck. It was ancient with flaky paint. One day I called him before I came to work and said I was really sick, I'd rather stay home. He begged me to come in saying we had a lot to do that day. So I came in, feeling like death warmed over. I got there and he had me sand the decades-long neglected running boards on the ancient truck for like 40 minutes. I walked into his house to say I'm going home, I feel like crap, and he was sitting there getting high. Every morning he gave me like a half hour of useless project busy work in the driveway so he could get stoned before we went out to work. I left and didn't go back. Story 13. I got a write-up. I was a server at the time. I told my managers that I was going on a teaching my interview a few hours out of town. I had graduated and was looking for my first full-time teaching position. This was like 10 years ago or so. They put me on the schedule as on-call for that interview day. I reminded them I wouldn't be able to show and they told me not to worry. Well, someone called in, and they told me I had to come. I reminded them I had a teaching interview several hours away and wouldn't make it. They said, okay, wished me luck at my interview, and got off the phone. I came in to work the next day, and the restaurant owners, not managers, the owners, told them to write me up for not being available. I asked if the server who called off was getting a write-up and they said no. So I said to the managers, so someone can call off with the sniffles and there's no consequence, but I'm literally trying to better myself and gave you advance notice and I'm the one getting the write-up? The managers looked at each other and said basically. I laughed and signed it and they said they didn't agree and tried to fight it. I actually believed them. They weren't the type of managers to dick you around. Anyway, one of them said, I thought for sure you'd quit over this. And I said I am. He asked when. I told him he'd know when I did. I got a teaching job a couple of weeks later and didn't tell anyone. I no-showed on my first contractual day as a teacher. This also happened to be the same week that they had opened the restaurant 26 years prior and they ran a special on a buffet and certain dinners every year to celebrate. It was always packed, and they had everyone on deck. The owners were pissed I didn't show and threatened to fire me if I didn't come in. I told them that was fine and said if they didn't need anything else, I had a classroom to set up. Then I hung up in their face. That's how they found out I got my first teaching job. I'm still friends with the managers. They told me my absence caused a shit show because the owners had overbooked and the servers they had on the floor with me had only recently been hired, and they were counting on me basically run the servers. A lot of meals were comped or had an additional price reduction due to poor service. They basically lost money the day I didn't show. Restaurant closed 3 years later, unrelated to my quitting but still, so sweet to know. Sucks to suck. Story 14. I was working at my first supervisor job. I was one of 3 people in charge of a warehouse overnight. My position started with me working from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., Monday to Friday and every other Saturday. Then I was told to come in every Saturday. They said don't leave until everyone else leaves and you lock up, which had me staying another hour or so until like 3 a.m. Then I was told you need to come in early around 4 p.m. to touch base with the day boss. Then COVID happened and they laid off like 80% of the company, including the other 2 supervisors on nights. So it was just me doing 3 people's jobs and a skeleton crew of like 8 people trying to the work of 20 people. We were behind every single night, and I wasn't allowed to leave until all the work was done and everyone else left. Several days I'd still be there finishing up when the day crew came in the mornings. They'd be angry that we were behind when we were all super overwhelmed after working 14+ hours every day, 6 days a week. I told them we either needed way more people, or the day crew needed to come in earlier or stay later to help because it wasn't sustainable. They told me I needed to come in earlier to meet with the boss and to train the day employees. I got home at 9 a.m., showered and went to sleep. Woke up at 2 p.m. to get to work at 3 p.m. When I got there, Day shift was already done with their work because they had a slow day. As I came in, the day shift supervisor handed me the keys and left early. That night, we were crazy busy fixing errors the day shift made. I was still there at 8 a.m. when the day shift came in. I sat in a chair in the main office waiting for the CEO to talk to him about how low night morale was. I was there until 10 a.m. and he never showed up. Went home and passed out. I was woken up at around noon by a bunch of emails and phone calls from the day shift supervisor asking me about some basic stuff that he should have known. I ignored his calls and replied to his email with my letter of resignation, absolutely tearing him and all the rest of the people in charge on days a new asshole. CC'd the CEO, CFO, and Director of Operations. Went back to sleep and had the best night's sleep I've ever had. That's all the time we have today. These stories give me more respect for fast food employees after seeing what they deal with on a daily basis. Anyways, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.